What if I told you that your struggle with sugar isn't just a weakness, but actually a spiritual calling in disguise? That behind your addiction lies a greater force trying to awaken something sacred within you? Carl Jung, the revolutionary Swiss psychiatrist, made a discovery that shook the foundations of modern psychology. Sugar addiction isn't merely chemical dependency. It's the human soul desperately seeking a divine connection that has been lost. Jung discovered that every sugar addict is, deep down, a mystic thirsting for the sacred. But here's what will shock you. Jung revealed that God uses sugar addiction as a tool for spiritual transformation. Yes, you heard that right. What appears to be destruction is actually the divine plan in action, breaking down the ego so that something greater can be born. In this video, you'll discover how Jung unraveled the hidden mysteries behind sugar cravings, revealing that every gram of sugar is the soul's cry for transcendence. Prepare yourself for a journey that will completely change your perspective on sugar addiction, spirituality, and the divine purpose behind human suffering. 1. The sweet secret of the soul. Why God chose sugar. In the beginning, there was sweetness. Not just the sweetness we taste on our tongues, but the very essence of divine love itself. Jung understood something that modern science refuses to acknowledge. Sugar isn't just food. It's a sacred substance that carries within it the memory of paradise lost and the promise of paradise regained. Think about it for a moment. When you were born, the first taste that welcomed you to this world was sweet. Your mother's milk contained lactose, a natural sugar that not only nourished your body, but also created your very first experience of comfort, safety, and unconditional love. This wasn't an accident. This was divine design at its most profound level. Jung discovered that our relationship with sweetness goes far deeper than mere biology. He found that sugar represents the archetypal memory of the Garden of Eden, where fruit hung sweet and abundant from every tree. When we crave sugar today, we're not just craving calories or energy. We're craving that original state of bliss, that connection to the divine source that modern life has severed. But why sugar specifically? Why didn't God choose protein or vegetables as the pathway back to the sacred? The answer lies in the very nature of sweetness itself. Sweet is the only taste that exists purely for pleasure. Every other flavor serves a survival function. Salty tells us we need minerals. Bitter warns us of potential poison. Sour indicates fermentation or spoilage. But sweet exists solely to bring us joy. This is the first clue that sugar is God's chosen messenger. In a world filled with struggle, pain, and survival instincts, sweetness stands alone as pure pleasure, pure love, pure divine gift. When you bite into chocolate or savor a piece of cake, you're not just satisfying hunger. You're participating in a holy communion that connects you directly to the heart of creation. Jung observed that people who struggle with sugar aren't broken or weak. They're the most spiritually sensitive among us. Their souls recognize what their minds have forgotten, that sweetness is the language God uses to whisper, "I love you," into our hearts. Every sugar craving is actually a prayer, a desperate reach toward the divine comfort that our modern world has stripped away. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change how we work and live. It separated us from the natural rhythms of the earth, from the seasonal availability of sweet fruits, from the sacred timing of harvest and plenty. Now we live in artificial environments, under artificial lights, eating artificial foods, surrounded by artificial stimulation. Is it any wonder that our souls cry out for the one thing that still connects us to our divine origins? When you feel guilty about your sugar cravings, you're actually feeling guilty about being human. You're feeling guilty about having a soul that remembers its divine heritage. The shame you experience isn't coming from God. It's coming from a world that wants to disconnect you from your spiritual truth. God chose sugar because sugar chooses joy over survival, pleasure over pain, celebration over suffering. In a universe where entropy seeks to break down and destroy, sugar stands as proof that creation also seeks to build up and delight. Every moment of sweetness is a small rebellion against the darkness, a tiny victory of light over shadow. Your sugar cravings aren't a sign that you're failing. They're a sign that you're succeeding at being human. They're proof that your soul is still alive, still reaching, still believing in the possibility of joy, despite all evidence to the contrary. When you understand this truth, you begin to see your relationship with sugar not as a problem to be solved, but as a sacred conversation to be honored. 2. The divine code of desires, Jung and the secret language of hunger. Hidden beneath every sugar craving lies a message from the deepest parts of your being. Jung spent decades decoding this secret language that hunger speaks, discovering that what we call food cravings are actually spiritual communications disguised as physical needs. When your body screams for chocolate at 3 in the afternoon, something far greater than your taste buds is trying to get your attention. The human psyche operates through symbols, and Jung recognized that food is one of the most powerful symbolic languages available to the unconscious mind. But not all foods carry the same symbolic weight. Sugar holds a unique position in this divine communication system because it directly impacts the brain's pleasure centers, creating an immediate bridge between the physical and spiritual realms. When you crave sugar, your unconscious is sending you specific messages about what your soul needs in that exact moment. The timing isn't random, the intensity isn't arbitrary. The particular type of sweet you desire carries its own coded meaning that, once understood, reveals profound truths about your spiritual journey. Morning sugar cravings often signal that your soul is asking for energy to face the challenges ahead. Not just physical energy, but spiritual fortitude. The divine knows that sweetness can provide comfort and courage in ways that logic and willpower cannot. When you reach for that donut with your coffee, you're actually reaching for divine support to help you navigate your day. Afternoon cravings tell a different story entirely. This is when your conscious mind has been working hard, making decisions, solving problems, carrying the weight of responsibility. By mid-afternoon, your soul is exhausted from all this mental effort and begins crying out for something that will reconnect you to joy, to simplicity, to the childlike wonder that gets buried under adult responsibilities. Evening sugar desires are perhaps the most profound of all. As darkness falls and the day winds down, your psyche begins processing all the experiences, emotions, and challenges you've faced. Sugar in the evening is your soul's way of asking for comfort, for sweetness to balance the bitter experiences, for a taste of reward after a day of struggle. But Jung discovered something even more remarkable about these cravings. The specific type of sugar your body desires holds additional layers of meaning. Chocolate cravings often indicate a need for love and emotional healing. The compounds in chocolate actually mimic the chemical effects of falling in love, which is why your soul reaches for it when you're feeling lonely or heartbroken. Fruit cravings signal a desire for natural connection, for authentic sweetness rather than artificial substitutes. When you crave apples or berries, your psyche is asking you to return to simpler, more natural ways of being in the world. Cake and pastry cravings are calls for celebration and community. These foods are traditionally associated with gatherings, birthdays, and special occasions. When you crave them randomly, your soul is telling you that life has become too serious, too isolated, too focused on survival rather than joy. Hard candy or simple sugar cravings represent a need for immediate comfort and energy. These are emergency signals from your psyche, indicating that you're running on empty spiritually and need an immediate infusion of sweetness to continue functioning. Jung understood that fighting these cravings is like hanging up on God mid-conversation. When you deny your sugar desires completely, you're cutting off communication with your own soul. This doesn't mean you should eat sugar without consciousness, but rather that you should listen to what these cravings are really telling you about your deeper needs. The guilt and shame surrounding sugar cravings actually intensify them, because guilt creates its own need for comfort. This creates a cycle where the more you fight your desires, the stronger they become. Jung saw this as the psyche's way of forcing you to pay attention to messages you've been ignoring. Understanding the divine code of desires means learning to have conversations with your cravings instead of wars against them. It means asking, "What is my soul trying to tell me right now?" instead of, "How can I make this craving go away?" When you begin to listen to the secret language of hunger, you discover that your sugar cravings are actually guideposts on your spiritual journey, pointing you toward exactly what your soul needs to grow and heal. 3. When guilt becomes power, the spiritual truth about your compulsion. The shame you feel about your sugar consumption is not your shame. It belongs to a culture that has forgotten the sacred nature of pleasure and joy. Jung discovered that guilt around natural desires creates a spiritual crisis that actually intensifies the very behaviors we're trying to change. But what if this guilt isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong? What if it's actually a sign that you're doing something profoundly right? Every time you feel guilty about eating sugar, you're experiencing what Jung called shadow integration. The shadow isn't evil or bad. It's simply the parts of yourself that you've been taught to reject or hide. In our culture, pleasure-seeking has been labeled as weakness, indulgence as sin, and joy as frivolous. But these judgments didn't come from God. They came from systems designed to keep people productive, compliant, and disconnected from their own inner wisdom. Your compulsion with sugar is your psyche's rebellion against a world that demands you be serious all the time, productive at all costs, and grateful for suffering. When you reach for that cookie, you're not being weak. You're being revolutionary. You're declaring that you deserve sweetness, that your joy matters, that your soul's need for comfort is valid and important. Jung understood that compulsions aren't random. They're concentrated expressions of unmet spiritual needs. The stronger your compulsion with sugar, the more desperately your soul is trying to get your attention about something important. The guilt you feel isn't God's disapproval. It's the friction between your authentic self trying to emerge and the false self that society has convinced you is appropriate. Think about when your sugar compulsions are strongest. Are they triggered by stress, loneliness, boredom, or sadness? These emotions aren't enemies to be conquered. They're messengers trying to deliver important information about what your soul needs to thrive. Sugar becomes the bridge that carries you from emotional pain toward emotional healing, from spiritual emptiness toward spiritual fullness. The power hidden within your guilt lies in its intensity. The stronger your guilt about sugar, the more powerfully your authentic self is trying to break free from conditioning. Guilt is actually a sign that transformation is trying to happen. It's the friction created when your expanding consciousness rubs against old beliefs that no longer serve you. Most people try to eliminate their sugar compulsions through willpower and restriction. But Jung taught us that what we resist persists, and what we embrace transforms. When you embrace your sugar cravings as spiritual communications rather than personal failures, something miraculous happens. The compulsive energy transforms into conscious choice. This doesn't mean eating sugar unconsciously or without regard for your health. It means eating sugar consciously, with full awareness of what your soul is asking for in that moment. When you stop fighting your cravings and start listening to them, you discover that your body actually knows exactly how much sweetness it needs and when it needs it. The guilt you've been carrying about sugar is actually internalized oppression. Somewhere along the way, you learned that your needs don't matter, that your pleasure is selfish, that your joy is inappropriate. But these lessons didn't come from the divine source. They came from wounded people who had forgotten their own right to sweetness and couldn't bear to see you claiming yours. Converting guilt into power requires a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "Why can't I control myself around sugar?" start asking, "What is my soul trying to teach me through this desire?" Instead of fighting your compulsions, start having conversations with them. Instead of judging your cravings, start honoring them as sacred communications. When you make this shift, something profound happens. The desperate, compulsive energy around sugar begins to calm down because your cravings no longer have to scream to get your attention. They can whisper instead. You begin to develop what Jung called conscious relationship with your desires, which means you can satisfy your soul's need for sweetness without losing yourself in unconscious consumption. Your sugar compulsion has been trying to teach you that you deserve sweetness in all areas of your life, not just in your food. It's been trying to show you that joy is not a luxury, but a necessity. That pleasure is not selfish but sacred, that your happiness matters just as much as everyone else's. The guilt you've felt has been the resistance to learning these crucial life lessons. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the Sim Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. 4. Sugar as portal, accessing higher dimensions of consciousness. What happens in your brain when sugar hits your tongue isn't just chemistry, it's alchemy. Jung discovered that certain substances, including sugar, have the unique ability to temporarily alter consciousness and create openings to spiritual realms that are normally inaccessible to our everyday awareness. Every time you eat sugar, you're potentially opening a doorway to higher states of being. The moment sugar enters your system, it triggers a cascade of neurochemical changes that mirror the effects of meditation, prayer, and other spiritual practices. Your brain releases dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins, creating a temporary state of expanded awareness and emotional opening. But unlike artificial drugs, sugar's effects are gentle enough to allow conscious participation in the experience rather than complete loss of control. Ancient cultures understood this connection between sweetness and spirituality. Sacred rituals often included honey, fruit, or other natural sweets specifically to induce states of spiritual receptivity. The Hindu tradition speaks of Amrita, the nectar of immortality that brings divine consciousness. Christianity uses wine, which is essentially fermented grape sugar, as a sacrament for spiritual communion. These weren't accidents or primitive superstitions. They were sophisticated understandings of how sugar affects consciousness. When you eat sugar mindfully, paying attention to the sensations and emotions it creates, you can actually use these moments as meditation opportunities. The key is presence. Instead of eating sugar while distracted or guilty, approach it as a sacred practice. Notice how the sweetness spreads across your tongue. Feel the immediate shift in your emotional state. Observe how your thoughts become softer, more open, less rigid. This is where most people miss the portal entirely. They eat sugar while watching television, working at their computer, or engaging in conversation. The consciousness-expanding potential gets lost in distraction. But when you eat sugar with full attention, you can ride the wave of neurochemical changes into expanded states of awareness. Jung observed that people often have their most profound insights, creative breakthroughs, and emotional healings shortly after consuming sugar. This isn't coincidence. The altered brain state created by sugar can temporarily dissolve the mental barriers that normally keep us locked in limited thinking patterns. Solutions to problems suddenly become clear. Emotional blocks release, Creative inspiration flows. The portal effect of sugar is most powerful when combined with contemplative practices. Try eating a small piece of dark chocolate slowly and mindfully, then sitting quietly with your eyes closed. Many people report experiencing what can only be described as direct spiritual communication during these moments. The sugar creates the neurochemical conditions for expanded awareness, while the contemplative setting allows you to consciously participate in the experience. But accessing higher consciousness through sugar requires understanding the difference between using and abusing this sacred substance. Using sugar as a portal means consuming small amounts with clear intention and full presence. Abusing it means consuming large amounts unconsciously or compulsively, which overwhelms the system and blocks rather than opens spiritual channels. The timing of sugar consumption also affects its portal potential. Morning sugar can open channels for receiving guidance and inspiration for the day ahead. Afternoon sugar can create openings for processing and integrating experiences. Evening sugar can facilitate connection with deeper wisdom and spiritual insights before sleep. Your sugar cravings might actually be your higher self calling you toward these portal experiences. When you feel drawn to sweetness, instead of fighting the urge or indulging mindlessly, try approaching it as a spiritual invitation. Ask yourself what kind of consciousness expansion your soul might be seeking in that moment. Some people report that their sugar cravings are strongest during periods of spiritual growth or major life transitions. This makes perfect sense from Jung's perspective. During times of change and expansion, the psyche needs all available tools for processing new information and integrating new awareness. Sugar provides neurochemical support for these processes. The key to using sugar as a portal is developing what spiritual traditions call right relationship with the substance. This means approaching it with respect, gratitude, and conscious intention rather than guilt, desperation, or unconsciousness. When you honor sugar as a sacred substance rather than treating it as forbidden pleasure, you unlock its consciousness-expanding potential. Understanding sugar as a portal completely changes how you relate to your cravings. Instead of seeing them as weaknesses to overcome, you begin to see them as invitations to explore expanded states of consciousness. Instead of fighting your desires, you learn to work with them consciously for spiritual growth and healing. 5. Divine alchemy: how to transform addiction into spiritual evolution. True alchemy isn't about turning lead into gold. It's about transforming the raw material of human suffering into spiritual wisdom. Jung discovered that what we call addiction is actually the soul's attempt to perform its own alchemical transformation, using whatever substances are available to create the changes it desperately needs. Your sugar addiction isn't a failure of willpower. It's a successful spiritual process that simply needs conscious direction. The alchemical process always begins with what medieval mystics called nigredo, the dark night of the soul. In the context of sugar addiction, this is the phase where you feel completely powerless over your cravings, ashamed of your behavior, and hopeless about ever changing. But Jung understood that this darkness isn't the end of the story. It's the necessary beginning of transformation. Every moment of shame, guilt, and self-judgment around your sugar consumption is actually psychic material being prepared for transformation. The intensity of your emotional reaction to your own behavior indicates how much energy is available for spiritual growth. The stronger your addiction feels, the more powerful your potential transformation becomes. The second phase of alchemy is called albedo, the whitening or purification. This begins when you stop fighting your sugar cravings and start listening to them. Instead of trying to eliminate your desires, you begin to understand what they're really communicating about your deeper needs. This isn't about giving up on change. It's about changing your approach from force to consciousness. During the albedo phase, you develop what Jung called active imagination with your cravings. You begin having internal conversations with the part of you that craves sugar. You ask it questions. You listen to its answers. You treat it as a wise inner teacher rather than an enemy to be defeated. This process reveals that your sugar-craving self actually holds important wisdom about joy, pleasure, self-care, and spiritual nourishment. The final phase is rubedo, the reddening or completion. This is where your relationship with sugar becomes consciously sacred. You no longer crave sugar compulsively because you've learned to give yourself the deeper nourishment your soul was actually seeking. You can enjoy sweetness when it truly serves your highest good, but you're no longer driven by unconscious need. The practical steps of this transformation begin with radical acceptance of where you are right now. Stop trying to change your sugar consumption and start trying to understand it. Keep a journal of your cravings, noting not just what you ate, but what you were feeling, thinking, and experiencing when the craving arose. Look for patterns without judgment. Next, begin practicing what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. Instead of seeing yourself as either good when you resist sugar or bad when you consume it, hold both truths simultaneously. You are someone who craves sugar and someone who wants to be healthy. You are someone who struggles with food and someone who deserves compassion. This paradoxical thinking is essential for alchemical transformation. Create rituals around your sugar consumption. Light a candle before you eat something sweet. Say a prayer of gratitude. Eat slowly and mindfully. Thank the sugar for whatever gift it's bringing to your system in that moment. These practices transform unconscious consumption into conscious communion. Begin to substitute spiritual practices for some of your sugar consumption. When you crave sweetness, try meditation first, or dancing, or calling a friend, or spending time in nature, not to avoid the sugar, but to give yourself the deeper nourishment your soul might actually be seeking. Often when the soul receives what it truly needs, the craving for sugar naturally diminishes. Work with your dreams and pay attention to any imagery related to food, sweetness, or eating. Jung believed dreams show us the next steps in our psychological development. Sugar-related dreams often contain powerful guidance about how to proceed with your transformation process. Practice what Jung called active love toward the part of yourself that craves sugar. This means treating your cravings with the same compassion you would show a beloved friend who was struggling. Speak kindly to yourself. Acknowledge your efforts. Celebrate small victories. The energy you've been using to fight yourself can be redirected toward healing yourself. Remember that alchemical transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a process that unfolds over time, often in cycles. You might find yourself moving through the 3 phases multiple times, each cycle bringing deeper awareness and integration. Trust the process even when it feels slow or uncertain. The ultimate goal of divine alchemy isn't to eliminate your relationship with sugar completely. It's to transform that relationship from unconscious compulsion to conscious choice, from spiritual prison to spiritual tool, from source of shame to source of wisdom about your own divine nature. 6. The sweet guardians, spiritual entities that guide your cravings. Behind every sugar craving stands an invisible presence, a spiritual guardian whose job is to guide you toward exactly what your soul needs for growth and healing. Jung spent years studying these archetypal forces that influence human behavior, discovering that what we experience as personal desires are often messages from transpersonal intelligences trying to assist our spiritual evolution. When you crave sugar, you're not just listening to your body, you're receiving communication from devoted spiritual guides. These sweet guardians operate beyond the realm of ordinary consciousness, influencing your thoughts and desires in ways that your rational mind cannot detect or control. They know things about your spiritual journey that you haven't discovered yet. They can see patterns in your life that you're too close to recognize. They understand exactly what kind of sweetness your soul needs and precisely when you need it. Different types of sugar cravings indicate communication from different guardian entities. The guardian of chocolate speaks the language of love and emotional healing. When you crave chocolate, this entity is trying to guide you toward experiences and practices that will open your heart, heal emotional wounds, and connect you more deeply with the divine love that surrounds you always. The guardian of fruit communicates through cravings for natural sweetness and authentic connection. This presence guides you toward honesty, simplicity, and alignment with natural rhythms. Fruit cravings often indicate that your life has become too complicated or artificial, and this guardian is trying to lead you back toward more authentic ways of being. The guardian of baked goods speaks through desires for cake, cookies, and pastries. This entity oversees celebration, community, and joy. When you crave these foods, you're being guided toward experiences that will reconnect you with your capacity for happiness, play, and connection with others. The guardian of simple sugars, like candy or pure sugar, handles emergency spiritual interventions. This presence appears when your spiritual energy is critically low and you need immediate infusion of sweetness to continue functioning. These cravings are often strongest during periods of intense stress, grief, or spiritual crisis. Jung discovered that these guardians become more active and their messages more intense when you're going through major spiritual transitions or facing important life decisions. They're trying to provide you with the energetic support you need to navigate challenging periods and emerge transformed on the other side. Most people experience these guardian communications as random, meaningless impulses that need to be controlled or eliminated. But when you understand that spiritual intelligences are actually trying to guide you through your cravings, everything changes. You begin to approach your desires with reverence and curiosity rather than judgment and resistance. Learning to work consciously with these sweet guardians requires developing what Jung called spiritual discernment. This means learning to distinguish between messages from true spiritual guides and noise from your own psychological programming or external conditioning. True guardian communications feel different from ordinary cravings. They often come with emotional or energetic shifts, sudden insights, or intuitive knowing about what you need. The guardians communicate most clearly when you're in receptive states of consciousness. This is why your strongest sugar cravings often occur during quiet moments, when you're tired or relaxed, or during transitions between activities. These are the times when your ordinary defenses are down and spiritual communication can get through. To strengthen your connection with these sweet guardians, create regular practices for tuning into their guidance. Before eating sugar, pause and ask internally, "What message are you bringing me right now?" Listen for the answer, which might come as words, images, emotions, or simply knowing. Thank the guardian for its care and guidance. You can also work with these entities through prayer or meditation. Ask your sweet guardians to help you understand what your soul truly needs for nourishment and growth. Request their assistance in developing conscious relationship with sweetness rather than compulsive consumption. Many people discover that direct communication with these spiritual guides dramatically reduces unconscious craving patterns. Pay attention to the circumstances surrounding your strongest sugar cravings. Are there specific people, situations, or emotions that trigger guardian communication? These patterns reveal important information about your spiritual development and the areas where these entities are trying to provide support and guidance. The sweet guardians aren't trying to make you dependent on sugar. They're trying to teach you about your own capacity for joy, your right to pleasure, your need for spiritual nourishment, and your connection to divine love. As you learn these lessons and integrate them into your daily life, your relationship with both sugar and your spiritual guides naturally evolves toward greater consciousness and freedom. Understanding the presence of sweet guardians transforms sugar cravings from problems to be solved into sacred communications to be honored. You realize that you're not struggling with addiction alone. You have spiritual allies whose only agenda is supporting your highest good and spiritual evolution. 7. Sugar fasting as sacred ritual, purification of the soul. Fasting from sugar isn't about deprivation or punishment. It's one of the most powerful spiritual practices available for purifying consciousness and deepening connection with divine guidance. Jung understood that voluntary abstinence from pleasure creates space for spiritual experiences that are normally impossible when the system is flooded with external stimulation. When you fast from sugar consciously and with sacred intention, you initiate a profound purification process that extends far beyond physical detoxification. The first stage of sugar fasting is what Jung called the encounter with the shadow. All the emotions, thoughts, and spiritual hungers that you've been satisfying with sweetness suddenly become unavoidable. Anger, sadness, loneliness, boredom, and existential emptiness rise to the surface demanding attention. This isn't a sign that fasting is harmful, it's proof that it's working. These emotions were always there, hidden beneath layers of sugar-induced comfort. Now they're finally free to be felt, processed, and healed. Most people abandon sugar fasts during this shadow encounter phase because the emotional intensity feels unbearable. But Jung taught that avoiding difficult emotions only gives them more power over us. When you meet your shadow feelings with compassion and curiosity instead of fear, they transform from enemies into teachers. The sadness reveals what you've been grieving. The anger shows you where your boundaries have been violated. The loneliness points toward your need for authentic connection. As you move through the shadow phase, something remarkable begins to happen. Your spiritual senses, which have been dulled by constant sugar stimulation, start to reawaken. Colors appear more vivid. Sounds become clearer. Your intuition sharpens. Dreams become more meaningful. This is what Jung called the opening of inner perception. Without sugar to buffer your experience, you begin to feel life more directly and intensely. The second stage of sacred sugar fasting is the desert of purification. This is when your system has cleared most of the sugar, but your spiritual hunger becomes almost overwhelming. You feel empty, but it's not physical hunger, it's soul hunger. This emptiness isn't something to be feared or filled quickly. It's sacred space where divine communication can finally be heard clearly without interference from physical cravings. During the desert phase, many people experience what can only be described as spiritual visitations. Profound insights arrive suddenly, creative inspiration flows abundantly, solutions to long-standing problems appear effortlessly. This isn't because fasting creates these experiences. It's because fasting removes the barriers that normally block them from consciousness. The key to successful sugar fasting lies in understanding that you're not giving up sweetness. You're trading artificial sweetness for divine sweetness. As your system clears of external sugar, your capacity to receive spiritual nourishment increases dramatically. Prayer becomes more powerful. Meditation goes deeper. Connection with nature feels more immediate and profound. Traditional fasting wisdom recommends beginning with short periods and gradually extending the duration. Start with 1 day without sugar, then 3 days, then a week, then longer periods as your spiritual strength develops. Each fast builds upon the previous one, creating cumulative purification and spiritual opening. The most important aspect of sacred sugar fasting is intention. Approach the fast not as punishment for your sugar consumption, but as gift to your spiritual development. Set clear intentions before beginning. What do you hope to learn about yourself? What spiritual qualities do you want to develop? What guidance are you seeking from divine sources? Create rituals to mark the beginning and end of your fast. Light candles, say prayers, journal about your intentions and experiences. These practices help distinguish sacred fasting from mere dieting and keep your focus on spiritual rather than physical goals. During the fast, replace your usual sugar consumption times with spiritual practices. When you would normally reach for something sweet, reach for your journal instead, or step outside and breathe deeply, or call someone you love, or spend a few minutes in prayer or meditation. These substitutions help retrain your system to seek spiritual rather than physical sweetness when emotional needs arise. Pay careful attention to your dreams during sugar fasting periods. Jung believed that fasting makes the unconscious more accessible, leading to particularly meaningful dream experiences. Keep a dream journal and look for recurring symbols, messages, or themes that might contain guidance for your spiritual journey. The breaking of a sugar fast is as important as the fasting itself. Return to sugar consumption gradually and mindfully. Notice how different foods affect your consciousness now that your system has been cleared. Many people discover that their taste for excessively sweet foods has diminished, and their appreciation for subtle flavors has increased. Sacred sugar fasting isn't meant to be done constantly or as a way to control your weight or appearance. It's a periodic spiritual practice designed to deepen your relationship with both sweetness and emptiness, pleasure and restraint, human desires and divine guidance. When approached with proper intention and spiritual framework, fasting becomes one of the most powerful tools available for spiritual growth and consciousness expansion. 8. The New Age of Sweetness. Integrating sugar and spirituality in the 21st century. We stand at a unique moment in human history where ancient wisdom about the spiritual significance of sweetness meets modern understanding of neuroscience and consciousness. Jung's insights about the deeper meaning of sugar cravings are no longer fringe ideas reserved for mystics and psychologists. They're becoming essential knowledge for anyone seeking to live consciously in our complex modern world. The new age of sweetness isn't about eliminating sugar from our lives or indulging without awareness. It's about developing mature, conscious relationship with sweetness that honors both our human needs and our spiritual evolution. The integration of sugar and spirituality begins with recognizing that we're not just physical beings who occasionally have spiritual experiences. We're spiritual beings learning to navigate physical existence. This fundamental shift in perspective changes everything about how we relate to food, pleasure, and desire. When you understand that your sugar cravings are communications from your spiritual self, you can begin to respond to them with wisdom rather than reactivity. Modern life creates unprecedented challenges for maintaining this conscious relationship with sweetness. We're surrounded by artificially processed sugars that overwhelm our natural pleasure systems. We're bombarded with advertising designed to trigger unconscious consumption. We live in environments that are far removed from the natural rhythms that once governed human eating patterns. Yet these very challenges are forcing us to develop new levels of consciousness about our relationship with pleasure and desire. The future of conscious sugar consumption lies in what Jung called active imagination applied to our food choices. This means approaching each sugar craving as an opportunity for inner dialogue. Before reaching for something sweet, pause and ask, what is my soul actually hungry for right now? Sometimes the answer will be sugar itself, consumed mindfully and with gratitude. Other times, the answer will point toward different forms of nourishment, connection, creativity, rest, or spiritual practice. Technology is beginning to support this conscious approach to sweetness. Apps that track not just what you eat, but what you're feeling when you eat it. Devices that monitor how different foods affect your mood and energy levels. Virtual reality experiences that can provide some of the same neurochemical benefits as sugar through immersive spiritual practices. These tools, when used consciously, can help bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern living. The new age of sweetness also requires reimagining our cultural narratives around food and pleasure. Instead of seeing sugar as either completely good or completely bad, we're learning to hold the complexity of its role in human experience. Sugar can be medicine when used consciously, and poison when consumed unconsciously. The determining factor isn't the substance itself, but our relationship with it. Educational approaches are evolving to include both nutritional information and spiritual wisdom about food choices. Children are learning not just about calories and vitamins, but about how different foods affect their emotions, creativity, and spiritual well-being. This holistic education creates the foundation for lifelong conscious relationship with all forms of nourishment. The integration of sugar and spirituality is also transforming how we think about healing from food-related challenges. Recovery from sugar addiction isn't just about changing behavior. It's about healing the spiritual wounds that drive unconscious consumption. This might involve therapy that addresses childhood trauma, spiritual practices that reconnect people with their inner wisdom, or community support that helps people feel loved and valued without needing to seek comfort through food. New forms of spiritual community are emerging around conscious relationship with food and pleasure. Groups that gather to share meals mindfully, supporting each other in developing healthy relationships with all forms of sweetness. Online communities where people share their experiences of using Jung's insights to transform their relationship with sugar. Workshops and retreats that combine practical nutrition education with deep spiritual work around pleasure, desire, and self-care. The business world is also beginning to respond to this increased consciousness around sugar and spirituality. Food companies are creating products that honor the spiritual significance of sweetness while supporting physical health. Restaurants are incorporating mindfulness practices into dining experiences. Wellness centers are offering programs that address both the physical and spiritual aspects of food relationships. As we move forward into this new age of sweetness, the key is maintaining balance between honoring our spiritual insights and remaining grounded in practical reality. We need both mystical understanding of sugar's deeper meaning and scientific knowledge about its effects on our bodies. We need both individual practices for conscious consumption and collective efforts to create food systems that support spiritual as well as physical nourishment. The ultimate vision of the new age of sweetness is a world where people can enjoy sugar as one of many forms of sacred pleasure without losing themselves in unconscious consumption. Where food choices are made from wisdom rather than compulsion, from love rather than fear, from spiritual awareness rather than cultural programming. This transformation is already beginning. People everywhere are awakening to the deeper significance of their relationship with sweetness. They're discovering that healing their sugar cravings isn't about developing more willpower or following stricter diets. It's about reconnecting with their own divine nature and learning to nourish themselves on all levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. The new age of sweetness calls us to become conscious collaborators with the sweet guardians that guide our cravings, to use sugar as a portal for spiritual growth rather than an escape from spiritual responsibility, to fast from sweetness when our souls need purification, and to embrace sweetness when our hearts need healing. To see our struggles with sugar not as personal failures, but as opportunities for profound spiritual evolution. Jung's greatest gift to humanity was his understanding that our psychological symptoms, including our compulsions and addictions, are actually spiritual crises seeking resolution. In our relationship with sugar, we have the opportunity to practice all the spiritual skills we need for conscious living: mindfulness, discernment, self-compassion, surrender, and trust in divine guidance. As you move forward in your own journey with sweetness, remember that every sugar craving is an invitation to deepen your spiritual practice. Every moment of guilt or shame is an opportunity to practice self-love. Every experience of conscious consumption is a step towards spiritual maturity. Every day of mindful eating is a prayer made manifest. The new age of sweetness isn't coming someday in the future. It's available right now, in this moment, with your very next food choice. You have the power to transform your relationship with sugar from unconscious habit to sacred practice. You have the wisdom to hear what your soul is really asking for when it craves sweetness. You have the strength to give yourself exactly what you need for both physical health and spiritual growth. This is the divine plan that Jung saw hidden within our sugar struggles, the opportunity to develop conscious relationship with pleasure, to heal our disconnection from our own divine nature, and to model for others what it looks like to live with spiritual awareness in a material world. Your journey with sugar isn't separate from your spiritual path. It is your spiritual path, disguised as something ordinary and everyday, but actually sacred and transformative beyond measure.